Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. I have been working my way back through the works of James Herbert and we've reached The Dark, which I was very excited to return to because I have very fond memories of first reading this book. We're at a strange period in James Herbert's career, if you remember, where he's sort of returning back to the well. The previous book I talked about, Lair, was his first direct sequel, a direct sequel to his first book, The Rats, and I wasn't blown away by it. And now with The Dark comes what I've always viewed as a sort of retread of his second book, The Fog, where The Fog was about this sort of quasi-sentient fog which roamed around the southeastern countryside, eventually settled on London, and anyone caught within it is turned insane, sort of psychotically, murderously insane. Here with The Dark, instead of a fog, we have an almost physical darkness, which is some sort of physical manifestation of absolute evil, which is guided by the mind of some parapsychologist and his cult of followers who committed mass ritual suicide to sort of commune with, access and control this darkness. And as with the fog, as the fog spreads, so the darkness spreads, comes out at night, as you would imagine, and it infects anyone it comes into contact with and sort of unlocks the evil in their nature. And so we have once again sort of scenes of riots, mass violence, sort of escalating madness and violence and evil in a parallel with The Fog. Sorry, this is my old paperback copy. You can see how beaten up it is, but I just got distracted there because there's nothing like this smell. There's nothing like the smell of an old paperback book. I remember really digging this. I actually remembered this as sort of an even more amped up version of The Fog, and I love The Fog. It's a sort of widescreen action movie of a novel that just amps up and up and up and gets crazier and crazier. This follows a similar trajectory, but doesn't really, upon reread to my mind, fulfill the brief as well as The Fog did. It doesn't deliver as well as The Fog did. Our hero in The Dark is a man called Bishop, who is a parapsychologist who likes to use scientific methods to, as often as possible, disprove the existence of supernatural or parapsychological influences in haunted houses and situations where people have, strange visitations and feelings and the like. So the most interesting thing for me now about The Dark is that Bishop, who is a fairly forgettable throwaway cookie cutter James Herbert character, is clearly a sort of a dry run, a prototype, if you will, of a much more successful character of his, David Ash, which he'll introduce later on in the novel Haunted. And Ash himself will get 2 sequels of his own. I think it's fair to say, and don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of the works of James Herbert, but I think it's fair to say that not all of his hero protagonists are that memorable. They're sort of everymen. They don't really stand out. I think I remember reading him saying that he kind of does that on purpose so that the reader more often than not can put themselves in his shoes. And I guess I can kind of see that, but a lot of his heroes are bland. Let's just put it out there and say it. A lot of his heroes are bland. It's very hard to name any of them. David Ash, I can remember. One of them's called Creed, but I only remember that, I think, because the book is called Creed. And there's Frank Dismer from the others, who is a completely atypical James Herbert protagonist. Bishop is kind of a very typical James Herbert figure. He's sort of gruff, rough. He does things his own way. He knows his own mind. He comes into contact and conflict with authority, in this case, a sort of parapsychological setup that believes in this sort of evil as a real physical entity, and that's what's going on, and he sort of can't get his head around that. He says, no, that's ridiculous, and he sort of butts up against them, as any good James Herbert hero does, but at the same time there's an attractive sort of age-appropriate lady involved there that they have an instant connection with and a rapport. So far so usual. Strangely, for a James Herbert novel, they don't actually have sex during the novel, but we follow Bishop as he sort of investigates these strange instances that seem to begin in the cellar of a particular house on a particular street, and then that madness seems to infect the street, and then later on as time passes the wider area, and then eventually sort of engulfs London in a very similar sort of John Wyndham-esque doomsday scenario that he laid out in The Fog. The reason it's not as successful for me possibly has something to do with my faulty memories of the book. There are some very jarring and very shocking things that happen in it. And so when I read it in my adolescence, those scenes sort of must have imprinted themselves on my mind. I can still clearly remember them, and they did thrill and chill me at the time. So absolutely job done there, Mr. Herbert. Reading it back, an awful lot of that stuff happens towards the start of the book. There are some acts of violence at the start. There's a shocking incident with a dog, and I'm really not down with violence against animals. I don't like it when it's for real in those Italian cannibal movies. And I know this is a story, and I know it's fiction, and so I'm not so squeamish that I can't appreciate that he's getting the emotional reaction out of me that he intends. It's a little off-putting having a dog hacked to pieces. Still, that's my problem. I got over it and carried on. Another incident in the book is where a couple of ladies are attacked with acid, and then there's another sort of scene where someone goes to visit a sort of, I mean, this is an old staple. This is a sort of amicus type thing, but they go to visit someone. They go to visit someone in a mental asylum, and once they're in there, they realise that the people pretending to be the nurses and the guards are actually the inmates. The inmates have taken over. That really creeped me out when I was a kid. That all happens quite close to the start, and then we do get these sort of widescreen action set pieces that Herbert is so good at, but quite often in sort of like the final third of the novel, we're told rather than shown. We stick now instead with Bishop and his small group of people who are trying to understand what the dark is and how to battle it. And we're kind of told, a couple of weeks now have passed since that fucked up shit that happened at the end of the last chapter, and there have been loads more riots, and there's been loads of this, and the emergency services are doing this. And then there's another sort of jump, and it's about 3 weeks have passed, and everything's still going to hell. And I was thinking, wow, it's really weird that James Herbert is telling us all about this and not showing us. This is his meat and potatoes. This is how he does things. Show us all this crazy stuff happening, across London. But sadly, we don't. What we do get towards the end is a fairly protracted action escape sequence, where our group of heroes have to sort of... There's a quasi sort of Nigel Neal attempt to fuse sort of the supernatural and science, where the government scientists aren't willing to take on board the parapsychological implications of what is happening. So they set up this big old experiment, and I could imagine Quatermass do it, something like this happening in Quatermass at the site of the old house that's now been bulldozed, setting up huge arc lamps and stuff like that, and the army's involved, and the scientists are there taking readings behind their bank of desks, and there are two sort of psychics sat there at the centre, the focal point of all of this, and all of the floodlights, and then the floodlights start going out, and then clearly the army is made up of people, and some people are more susceptible to the dark than others. So the army, the very people sent there to protect them, some of them turn on each other, take out the lights, and then the darkness comes in, and the people who are hiding in the darkness come in. Excellent set piece. Then our heroes have to try and flee from that, and we follow them across a series of chapters where they just have to survive that one night, which in another context would be a sort of superb denouement, a real nail-biting denouement of a story. But this is a story of sort of panic, madness and violence that is now sort of, as an infection, spread out across the entire of London, and we don't really get to see any of it. And I found that very frustrating. Another thing I found frustrating is because of the nature of the evil in this, because it is so esoteric, there is literally nothing our heroes can do to affect the narrative in any way, and I found that a little bit frustrating. You have a hero who is dead. You have an antagonist who is dead before the start of the novel, and through the power of his mind has sort of survived death and now exists within this dark. And really the only way to counteract that is by some equal and opposite force that is absolutely beyond the ken of our hero. So the solution that comes about, it does have the feeling of a sort of deus ex machina, which is unfortunate. I don't know there's any way necessarily to fix it, and I don't know whether it necessarily does need fixing. I just found myself more disappointed this time round than when I was a sort of gleeful, horror-hungry adolescent just lapping up all of the horror. It didn't feel as tight, and it didn't feel as urgent as The Fog did, and it's clearly trying to follow in The Fog's footsteps, and he kind of strangely doesn't pull it off, which is weird. So this is 2 in a row, because I wasn't taken with The Lair either as the next necessary chapter in the Rats saga, if you will, and I'm not entirely convinced that another run at The Fog was entirely necessary. There's nothing new enough brought to the table here to warrant a do-over. Luckily, he's going to go in a completely new direction with his next book, The Jonah. I don't remember The Jonah being as successful and as celebrated as some of his others. We'll get onto that when we talk about The Jonah. But unfortunately, The Dark was a surprising miss, a near miss for me, but a surprising miss. But looking on the bright side, it smells gorgeous.
I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.